All right, today we are diving into something pretty serious. It's a formal complaint filed against the Queens County District Attorney's Office. And this isn't just some minor legal tiff. We're talking about really heavy allegations of retaliation, fabricated evidence, and even the intentional concealment of a criminal case. So let's get into it and break down exactly what's being claimed here.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty, it's so important to remember what a prosecutor is supposed to be. As this quote from their own ethical guidelines says, their job isn't just to get a win. It's to find justice for everybody in the room. And that absolutely includes the person being accused. That's kind of the whole foundation of the trust we put into the system.
And that leads us to the massive question at the heart of this whole thing. What happens when the very people we trust to enforce the law are accused of bending it, of misusing their incredible power? This complaint really puts that question front and center.
Okay, so what are the actual accusations here? Let's break down the specific claims that make up this complaint.
So it all boils down to 5 core claims. First, that this was all retaliation, that a criminal case was essentially made up. Second, that the DA's office then hid that case on purpose. Third, this idea of a quid pro quo, that an immigration benefit, specifically a T visa, was dangled as a bargaining chip for cooperation. Fourth, that they made contradictory statements to the court. And finally, that all of this might have even served to indirectly cover up some other alleged fraud. Yeah, these are not small claims.
To really get why these allegations are so connected, you have to look at the sequence of events. The complaint lays out a very specific timeline, and when you see it all together, it really starts to paint a picture.
Okay, let's zoom in on this T visa. Now, this is a special visa for victims of human trafficking who cooperate with law enforcement. According to the complaint, the certification for this visa was flat out denied on August 26th. But then, get this, just 20 days later, it's suddenly approved. The complaint basically says, hey, look at this sudden flip-flop. That's a huge motivator for a witness to play ball.
And this timeline puts that visa decision right into context. See, it all starts with subpoenas being requested for the DA and an assistant DA. Shortly after that, the T visa gets denied, and then boom, it's approved. A month later, in October, an ADA mentions there's an active case but offers 0 details. Then, silence for months, until March, when the office finally admits there's an investigation but says no charges have been filed. That gap, that's the key.
So let's talk about this 4-month gap, because this is absolutely critical. From October, when the case was first even mentioned in court, all the way to March, when it was finally put on the record in a motion, the complainant is alleging that for 4 entire months, this case was intentionally and completely hidden from them.
And this quote from the complaint just spells it out. A prosecutor confirms a case exists, but then, allegedly, nothing is turned over. No information, no files, nothing. And that, right there, leads us straight into the rules that are supposed to stop this exact thing from ever happening.
All right, let's switch gears for a second and talk about the actual rules, the legal and ethical framework that prosecutors in New York have to play by.
At the heart of all this is New York's discovery reform law. See, before 2019, New York had what lawyers called the blindfold law. The defense would often walk into a trial almost completely in the dark about the evidence against their client. The new law, Article 245, threw that out. It requires open and, importantly, timely sharing of information. It's all about fairness.
And the law is super specific. Prosecutors have to turn over things like names of potential witnesses, any evidence that could actually help the defendant, and here's the big one for this case, any rewards, promises, or inducements offered to their witnesses. And you can see how the complaint frames that T visa approval as a major potential inducement that should have been disclosed immediately.
The ethical rules really double down on this. This quote confirms that a prosecutor's duty is to disclose anything that might poke holes in their own case. An alleged 4-month concealment flies directly in the face of this fundamental principle.
So if you're going to claim someone in power fabricated evidence against you, what does that actually take to prove? And who's the ref here? Who holds prosecutors accountable when these complaints get filed?
A fabricated evidence claim is a huge deal. It's a serious constitutional violation. In fact, the Supreme Court has weighed in on this. They've made it clear that you can't even sue a prosecutor for making up evidence against you until after the criminal case is completely over. And this is the important part. It has ended in your favor. So that sets an incredibly high bar, which tells you just how significant these claims are when they do come up.
So where does a complaint like this actually go? Well, it goes here, to the Commission on Prosecutorial Conduct. This is the official body in New York that investigates these things. Think of them as the watchdogs.
They're an independent agency, and they have the power to investigate and figure out if a prosecutor crossed a line. This is the exact system designed for these kinds of allegations.
So when you put all of this together, the complaint, the timeline, the very serious allegations, it all really leaves us wrestling with a massive question about our justice system itself.
Look, the allegations against the Queen's DA's office are, for now, just allegations. But they force all of us to confront a really fundamental challenge. How do we make sure that the incredible power we give to prosecutors is always used for justice, and not for any other reason? And when that trust gets questioned, what does real accountability even look like? That's the question at the very heart of this story.